The Father's Table, an introspective look and conversation about our fathers and how they shaped our lives.
Welcome back to the Father's Table. I'm your host, Keith Ellaby, and today I have Aaron Walker joining me at the table. Aaron is, I believe, the founder of Rise 5, outreach group, whose mission really struck me when I looked it up on the website. It says it is to unite Black men, preserve masculinity, create safe places, and resources for men to thrive and to bridge the gap of fatherlessness. That is an awesome, awesome mission statement, may I add. And Aaron, thanks for joining the show.
Sure, man, for sure. Excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much. I want to ask you this. In the part of your mission statement, the preserve masculinity part, how did you come up with that when you were writing your mission statement?
Well, as we were thinking about, some of the issues that are affecting our Black men in America, we could not ignore the fact that identity and masculinity were tied in between each other. And so we didn't want to kind of skip over and graze over everything else and not act like the masculinity is under attack. And so that was one of the things that I wanted to be clear about when we started to build the foundation of it, how important masculinity is.
Oh, absolutely. Just this morning, I was reading a news article because I'm out here in LA, and there's this story out here. I don't know how true it is. I believe it was like a 14-year-old was forced to take estrogen, but to treat a like a disorder. It's called oppositional defiance disorder, and the doctors like injected him with estrogen, and I'm like, what is that? And I didn't really understand that, but I guess the result of that, the young man grew breasts, and his parents didn't even sign off on it. It was like at a detention center or facility.
The commonest thing that I said is the system that gives because like I told you, I'm a chaplain at a youth detention center. And one of the most strangest things that I used to see, and I couldn't really get used to, is this part in the day where they would like give them their medication. And so we'll be in one of the sessions with the guys. And I mean, these guys will literally be out for the count. They'll go from being up here excited and engaging, and then about the next 10 minutes in the meeting while everybody's still talking and alive, they'll start nodding off. And I had to ask one of the young men there, I said, what is it that these, when they give you all the medication, what does it do? And he was like, man, one of the side effects is it makes you get really sleepy. The other one makes you really emotional and so forth and so on. And so, all these side effects that whatever they give these kids to contain their behavior or to modify behavior, it's a whole nother topic in and of itself.
Oh, absolutely.
So I'm not surprised about the whole, like these drugs that are using to deform our kids.
That could be a whole nother show.
I'm telling you.
We're not going to touch that right now.
Right.
But, okay, so at the opening of every show, I would like to ask our guests to close their eyes, take 3 deep breaths, and when you're done, tell me the first thing that comes to mind when you think about your father.
Yeah. I'm on a podcast, bro. Okay. The third breath outside of that question,
Yeah.
it made me think about The beach, ironic enough, I don't know. I thought about a beach,
Mhm.
and I thought about waves just smacking my face and toes in the sand. It was weird. So yeah.
Did your father take you to the beach at all?
No, not at all, actually, because I stayed in Chicago at Lake Michigan, and that was one of the places we dreamed about. And then finally, we got old enough. We used to go up there and cause havoc and throw sand at each other.
Okay,
City boys going to the beach, and so it was a fun thing to do when we were young.
gotcha.
But one of the things I do think about when I think about my father is when he used to um, come pick me up, and we used to go to this convenience store and get jelly beans, and I used to pick through the jelly beans, all the purples out. And he used to always say, like, what you picking through? That's the best jelly bean ever. And I'm like, this is nasty as what? And he'll take all of them, he'll eat them. So I remember that clear as day.
Awesome, awesome, man. Just so let's just rewind the clocks a little bit.
Mhm.
Um, Tell me about your father, as far as your early childhood is concerned. How was your interactions and relationship with him when you were like a toddler, a little one running around, if you can remember anything?
Well, those ages, I really didn't remember him much until I got around maybe 2 or 3. And then sporadically throughout my later years, maybe like when I started becoming 8 and 10, and then it just became more faint and faint. But the times when he wasn't around, all I remember for the most part is him just kind of being very quiet. He's a really quiet, reserved guy for the most part. His nickname was Slim. I didn't know why they called him Slim, but they called him Slim. But he was smooth, man. He was a smooth guy, and for the most part, he was a man of little words, but a lot of action.
Gotcha,
And depending on what it was no action. So
gotcha.
that's kind of what I thought about.
So it sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like
Hmm.
you didn't grow up with your father in the house.
Yeah, no, not at all.
So what was
Mm-mm.
the dynamic or the origin of your father's relationship with your mother?
They met. Dad had just got divorced not too long. They had ended up meeting, and after meeting, Dad was in the Vietnam War, so he was back and forth um, in the war and coming back home, and war coming back home, and so even their relationship was a little spotty from time to time. Um, and so, as far as household setting, I told you kind of previously, I didn't grow up in the house with them particularly per se. And so I usually glean from my brothers who were there a little bit longer in the house with them that can kind of generate the kind of relationship that they fostered. What they usually said is that the only time that they really got along, or the only time they were really kind of on one accord, when it was about either money or some type of drugs, because at the time they were strung out on drugs, and so they shared that same commonality. So that was the only time that was kind of like this sense of peace, my brother would say. But anytime either one of those were missing, which is common in most situations and circumstances, money or if the drugs is missing, then there's a disturbance overall in the relationship of the parents. And so that was kind of rocky. That was kind of like unaffectionate, unemotional, unattached to anything. Even with my mom was, a little bit more attached and a little bit more passionate. And my dad just wasn't that type of guy, unless
Gotcha.
it was about money and drugs. So,
Got, gotcha. So you said you didn't grow up in the house with either one of your parents.
correct,
Were you
correct.
with your grandparents?
No, no, no. Actually, so I grew up in foster care. So because of the dynamic of
The
their
dynamic
relationship,
relation. Yeah.
it made them, in some sense, and at that time they were kind of unfit. And my dad had left for a long period of time, and my mom, she was in and out of the house, and we were staying at our grandmother's house at that time when all of this transpired. And then DCFS was called, which is the agency in Chicago. Um, and DCFL was called, and all my brothers and sisters who were in the house at that time all got put into the system and split up. They tried their best to keep us all together. A couple of us, two of my brothers moved together. They were able to put me and my sister together for a period of time. But because of for me, because of anger issues, because of like confusion about what was going on, what was happening, I became angry. I became, that type of kid, and staying with my sister for a little while. I ended up getting kicked out of that foster home with her, which made me even more angry because I'm like, that's the only sense of family I have. And so growing up in different foster homes and being at the mercy and hands of strangers was just a lifestyle that I had learned how to kind of cope with to survive. And then not having my father on top of that made things worse because, and here's what I also noticed: in a lot of the homes that they were placing me in, there was no father in those homes.
Really? There was no father in those homes?
There was no father.
Wow, that is amazing. That's really interesting dynamic to that. And so you grew up in this excuse me. You grew up in a system where your parents were struggling. They take your siblings, they move them into the foster care system. And I don't have much experience with that, but I do know people that have adopted, and I know even for the people that are adopting these children, it could be like an emotional roller coaster because sometimes the foster parents will really get attached to the kids and love on them, but then like a relative will come out of nowhere and say, "Oh, I could take them," and then it's like, are they fit to take them? Are they not fit? And then it's like this cat and mouse game, and I can only imagine how that is for a child, especially a young boy like yourself. Uh, and you said you were coping with anger uh, at that time. What's an example of that? Where did you get in a lot of fights or?
Yeah. So I was extremely aggressive, and I had a very quick temper. So in school, man, most of my suspensions came from fighting, or came from being misunderstood, or came from frustrating topics in school. Meaning, like when we had to start to draw diagrams of our family trees, things like that was emotional. And because I didn't have the understanding of what family really was, or where to start. And I realized, everybody could trace their family tree so far back. And for me, it was an emotional time. And so as a result of that, that unexpressed emotion, I would either, clown, or I either make fun of somebody else and agitate someone else to take the attention off of after actually doing the work. And as a result, I would get suspended or in trouble or detention or whatever they saw fit for me at the time.
Oh man. So it sounds like that was life, um, elementary school, going into middle school as well. So what was it like living at a foster home? What was the environment like? You said there was a lot of times there's no father, but how are the children and things like that, and the mother there?
The children were probably just as terrorizing. I mean, children at a young age, they have no filters and they don't really catch much about your feelings. And so, talking about trying to adapt socially now, right? Trying to adapt to somebody else's home, somebody else's parents, somebody else's resources, somebody else's love and affection can be very frustrating for some random child that pops up at your house one day and your mom tells them that they're your brother. And so it was really frustrating because they will smile while the parent was there, but then behind closed doors, they wouldn't want me to play their games. They wouldn't want, if we were out together, they didn't want to even acknowledge the fact that I lived in their house, or even I was their brother or anything like that. Or they'll just say, "Oh, that's just my foster brother. He don't belong. He ain't our real brother." And so they would say things like that. And you can imagine at as a young child, what that does to you as you're trying to find your place in life. You're trying to find your place in family, and what it all looks like. You're trying to find your place in relationship between brother and brother, or sister and brother, and trying to find out what that identity look like. And so, we got to talk about the shattered identity that you have when it comes to being a brother, or to being a son to a father, or a son to a mother. You see, those things are the after effects of those who go through those type of traumatic experiences, but never get the reconciliation. And so you most times, and this is why my next internship and what I'm about to start working at now is at a foster home, because I have to talk about the after you get out of the situation? Does the situation still get out of you?
Hmm.
And how do we heal past where we've come from? And so that is an ongoing process that sometimes, like, even though I was removed from them situations, and I was glad to be in the number to be able to survive some of the things that you go through when you have to go through those systems, but I cannot ignore the traumatic experience that was left behind that still needs to be cleaned up.
Oh yeah, yeah. I see that that's really important. With a lot of guests that I have on, a lot of a lot of them are Christian. I don't know if everyone I've ever interviewed is a Christian, but it seems like that's a part of the healing process of, a lot of times going to God for that cleaning up the past type of thing. So in coping with it, or well, not really coping with it, or just getting healed from it, um, getting a purpose behind it, and seeing clear. So with that, it's going moving forward a little bit through high school, just shifting to high school now, you still in the foster care system. Um, and you've been so so now you've been adopted officially by so that is your parents, and that's how that works. Can you explain to us how that works for the people that don't know?
So usually when a parent decides that they want to take full custody of you, or they call it guardianship, or they can, so they had the adoption. I don't know if it's still the same, but back then you could either take guardianship, meaning you don't have to adopt them, but you could take guardianship, meaning you're saying that I'm gonna take guardianship over them until they're ready to go on their own. Like, I'm adopt them means like, hey, I'm adopt them, they mine. I can change their name, all those things. Like, I'm gonna adopt them. And so I remember sitting in the courtroom when the time had came, and they were sitting me up on the little stand right there, and they were talking. The judge was right there, and right on my right hand side, and my foster parent, she was standing right in front of me. And so she was like, so today is the day, do you want your name changed? And I remember that was the first question. And I remember I had this anxiety in my spirit. Like, I was like, and at 8 years old, I'm like, I don't know about this. So I'm looking at her, looking at the judge, like, and then the judge, and he's like, you don't have to. It's just one of the things that we want to give the children the right to decide. And so at this first time, I realized that I had rights. And I was like, this is the first time I get to choose for myself, like what I want. And so with confidence, after she said that, I said, no, don't change my name. And
Mm.
so then I figured, and then she says, okay, we're gonna go through and we're going to give your foster parent guardianship. And so at the time I didn't know the difference. I thought I was adopted. There was guardianship, meaning that would be some type of guardianship, protection, covering until I get out on my own. But my record still will say the same. They would just say, guardian of, like somebody who took care of. And that's what she was. She was a good guardian over me. She helped keep me and create some stability in my life throughout those, 8 years where I had just been on rocky courses. And so it was a really good time. Well, it's good knowing that it was the first time in my life I experienced stability, right? So
So how old were you when you had guardianship, or when when someone did the guardianship thing with you? How you were 8, and from 8 till the time you got out of the house, that's how long you were at that home.
yes.
And but it sounds like it was a single parent home.
It started off first. It was a two-parent home. So
Okay.
it was dad and mom there. And
Okay.
so, and I get there, um, the environment, again, we got to talk about environment.
Yeah, go ahead,
And
man.
so the environment is, once again, it wasn't a bad environment, but it was an environment where, like, the same things were still true. I was a stranger coming to someone else's home, and I had to get adapted to the children that were there. It was three other children there. So I called them my brother, two boys and one girl. So two of my brothers and my sister that were there, and two of them was older than me, one of them was younger than me. So I had to deal with the pressure of two older people and one little terrorizing. So I'm a leader because I'm older, and now I still got to be a little brother because I'm younger. And so that dynamic was rough because I was a fighter and because I was angry and because that was just, I'm like, and trying to be accepted by the cousins who all stayed in the same building. So it's like a family building. And so trying to get accepted by them was also an issue. But then the dynamic between my mom and my dad, my foster mom and foster dad, was also interesting. They had been with each other for 30 years. Um, and I saw my foster mom go to work every day, come back, and I saw my dad, my foster dad. He would come and he would go, and some days he would stay longer. He wouldn't go to work. But when I learned a couple of things from him, the little time that he was there, one of the things that I learned that was important was the power of cleaning up, like the
Hmm.
power of environment. I mean, I don't care what you say. When we came home every day from school, that house was spick and clean, like
Hmm.
top to bottom. And so when he was there was order.
Hmm.
um, and when he was there, I mean, he would be like, all right, go in there, do this, make sure this is done, clean up this and do this, this, this. And it felt good to come into a space that had order. And then that I could honor the voice of another man. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, because I grew up so much with like women, 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 and that's cool. But it was like not hearing the voice of the other men could either be encouraging or intimidating, right? Depending on
Hmm.
the young man. And so for me, it was an encouraged thing. It was something I had needed for my soul because in my soul, I'm like, I'm a warrior. So I need to see other men. I need to be, and I need to see that. And so to see him, he'd be in there doing push-ups and stuff like that because he was a prior convict. So it was just his nature. It was crazy. And so, but what I learned, and the other part about it is that I started to learn dysfunctional relationships because while this was a 30-year marriage, he was strung out on, cocaine and my mom, she didn't do drugs, but they had grew up together in the same public housing, and she just figured that if she take him along the ride, that this thing would just turn out to be good, and so she did this for 30 years plus, and suffering in silence and just being tortured on the inside, knowing that was more. And I watched her do that over and over and over again until they had to divorce. So after 30 years of them being together, I had to watch them divorce. So I watched dysfunctional relationships. Then I watched a divorce take place. And then I watched a remarriage take place with another guy that comes in the home who's younger than the man that was there before. So then you see the total opposite dynamics of men. You see a man who says, strung out or not, here are the responsibilities that I both hold in the house. And then you get a younger guy, maybe 15 years younger than the previous guy, and you see a whole nother dynamic shift. Like the house is dirty, no responsibilities, and I was frustrated with this. And so a little bit older, when I got older, because they didn't divorce until I was like a teenager,
Hmm.
and then it caused friction in the house then. And
Gotcha.
this is when I was getting into fights with him. I was arguing with him because he was trying to tell me to do something, and I'm like, you don't do nothing. And so we had this dynamic going on. I'm like, he's younger. I'm like, he close to my oldest brother's age, so it's just hard to respect that. And I was like, he ain't strung out on cocaine, but he's strung out on marijuana. And so I had these comparisons and these frustrations, and so I'm like, and I had told myself, I said, I vowed not to do drugs. I vowed not to do none of these things. Is because my dad was a victim of it. I said my foster parents, my the guy who was my foster parent was a victim of it, and then my mom, what's name, is a victim of it, or participant, victim of it.
Yeah.
They were
Yeah.
a victim of it, right? And so I said to myself, what am I going to choose? What kind of man what I'm going to choose to be? And I said, I can't do that route, whatever that is. I won't go that route. And so that frustration constantly happened when, especially as a young man, you may not say it out your mouth, but in your heart, you're looking for another man. You're looking for another man. And that's
Right.
undeniable. And any man that say anything different ain't lying. They lying.
Oh yeah, man. I agree wholeheartedly. That must be a tough transition, man. It's like like a third father figure in your life, and I'm curious, how was your relationship with your biological father at this point? Was it like completely non-existent, or was it once in a while he'll pop up?
It was once in a while, then it became like silence. I didn't hear from him or see him. And then ironically enough, man, this is really when it happened. Um, when I was out on the street gang banging, and found out my brother went to the same school across the street from the same neighborhood I was gang banging on. And I had an encounter one day with his school. Some guys from his school didn't even know he went to that school, and then got into a big brawl and fight, or was attempting to get into a big brawl to fight. The dean at the school called us into the building. And so as we were in the building, kind of like this kind of real moment, they were standing on one side of the room and we were standing on another side of the room, and the dean was in the middle of the room kind of giving this an inspirational speech about men sticking together. And I didn't know that later on I'd be chanting those same words. You see how funny that is, right? And so he was just talking about how we need to stand together as men and brothers, and we don't need to be fighting each other. And so, as my enemies are looking at us on this other side, and we mugging each other, and we looking for the right moment to just kind of just engage, because we were looking for a particular guy to come through the door who had started all of this mess. And so by the time the door swing open, there was about 3 guys that walked in, and one of those guys happened to be my brother. And I'm telling you, man, like, this shifted the whole room, because when he came in, I ain't seen him in a while, over some years. And so when he came in, I broke down crying. And so everybody, you can imagine my homies, they like, yo, he tripping. What's going on with him? Like, and so I broke down crying, and I saw him, he saw me, and we hugging in the middle of the room. And at that moment, the dean had took full advantage of this moment, and made his point strong. And I mean, it shifted the room. And by the end of that meeting, we were in arm, holding arm, locking arms, singing "Kumbaya," and we had and we had built a relationship. And at that moment, what I realized is that he had built a bridge between the guys that was in the streets and the guys that was in the schools. And so he says there would be no more division between you all. And as a result of that, he says, you know what, you all also have access to the resources that our school have. So when we have dances, when we have parties, when we open up our gym to you all are invited people. You all will no longer be just some guys roaming the neighborhood and don't have a family right here in the neighborhood that you all are in. And that in and of itself, was powerful. And so
That sounds powerful. Sounds like something out of a movie.
Yeah, man. I said I need to get that published.
That's amazing. So you connected with your estranged brother, and that's awesome. So you mentioned that you were gangbanging in the street. How old were you when you started gangbanging?
Prematurely. Yeah, it started off subtle, and that's usually how it is. I don't know how subtle it is now, but for me it was subtle. It was just spending a lot of days out, right? And I was around maybe 12, 13. So around 12 and 13, I was just hanging out. And then the guys that were on the block, they were always around. They were shooting dice by the parks that we were at, right? They had the everything that we thought that we wanted. And so they would periodically come over there, and I would say, like, subtly recruit people. They would watch all the young brothers that were in the neighborhood. They would watch their talents, their gifts, and then obviously someone would make the approach. And that's what happened. Like, I just subtly, man, I was just out on the streets all the time, spending time with me and my boys. We were doing crazy stuff. And out of nowhere, it was just like more. And then my bigger brother, who was there at the time, he also was influenced. And then even my brother that was in my foster home, he was in it. My uncles, all of them were affiliated. So it for me, it was excitement. So I'm like, they got that brotherhood. That's always men around. I would sit with them when they used to come over at the house, and I used to be around them when they're talking drug talk, when they're talking money talk, when they're talking women talk. So I've got some of my, watch this, I got some of my most critical conversation pieces from men who were talking about things that were in the street, and those were the ones who talked to me and talked back to me. Those were the ones who listened to me. And so my uncle and my brother, who were affiliated in the streets, I mean, because what you learn about, being in that type of lifestyle, at least then, is that you had to be a people person. I mean, and so talking and transacting with people were like key and instrumental to your success. And so these guys were successful. So I wanted a part of that. I wanted to be
Yeah.
a part of that group. I wanted to be a part of those guys. I wanted that money. I wanted that success. I wanted the reputation. I wanted to be known for something. So as a result, I
And
decided to be affiliated and join.
and that's what you thought a real man was.
That's what I thought a real man was. And I took on all the characteristics at a very young age.
That's really interesting, and like you mentioned earlier, that's what I believe young men want. They want a man they could connect with, to show them, to guide them, and when the father's not around, someone else might take on that role, maybe directly or indirectly, and shape that child's life. So that moment with your brother was a dramatic shift in your life. How, so did that change your position on like education? Did you go to college after that? I think you might have mentioned you went to college, or did you not go to college, or you started businesses, or what did you do?
Poster streets,
You said post the streets.
post streets, post street
Post,
life.
yeah, post street life, post high school. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, man. Like it was about it was a lot of those guys that were in the street were very intelligent and smart, man, who told me, who didn't give me an option and said, man, you smart, you different than these other guys. You need to go off and you need to focus on your education. So a lot of times because I was committed to the thing, and when I did something, I said I did it. I put my everything into it. And so they were just saying like, man, you go hard, you do what you do, but this ain't for you, man. And I thought I took it as another form of neglect, man. I took it as another form of rejection. I'm like, what do you mean this ain't for me, man? I didn't did this. I'm about this. And I started throwing my weight around, and
Yeah,
they like,
yeah.
look, little man, this ain't what we talking about. It's some of us who gonna die in this. And he said, that ain't true. And he says, you go to school, man. Take the opportunities that we ain't got, man, and do what you gotta do. And with that speech and that talk, and when I watched a couple of my guys get killed right in front of me, beside me, at the same place, at the same time, and I end up kept getting away from this stuff, and I took their words and I heeded to it, and I took my way out, and I just started going to school, man, and I started like leaning into my education, especially in my high school years, man. I really leaned into my education. I started like applying myself because I didn't know before I left high school, before I left elementary school. I went to go get my records from the juvenile detention center, and when I unfolded, man, it was so thick. So when I started to look at the history that was connected to my name and to my father and to my other brothers and sisters and siblings, and some of the information I saw in there was, it was enough to make you boohoo for weeks, man. And so one of
Mhm.
the things that I saw, I said, I did not know that they had labeled me LD. So now
Can you
I'm
explain to
wondering
us
what
what LD is?
learning they said I had a learning disability. And I was like, I didn't know that. And then but I know I'm lying. I found this out after I graduated high school, because after
Okay.
high school, I went to go get my records. Because I said when go to college, I want to close the chapter of my life. I wanted to be finished with all this. I was creating a new path for myself. And I was like, I didn't know that they labeled me this in elementary school. And I didn't know I was labeled that in high school.
Mhm.
And so I'm like, I'm walking around and all the teachers know I have a learning disability, but what they fail to realize, because they see the whole picture, is that I didn't have a learning disability. I had a love disability. I had a leadership disability. Like that's what I had. People who didn't love me, people who came up short in leading my life and nourishing me, which translated on how I'm gonna learn in the classroom when I'm still struggling about if people love me. Like
Yeah,
that
yeah.
thing, like that was a real thing. And so when I got out of high school, man, I had made a vow to myself that when I'm done with this, man, like this chapter of my life, I said I have to forgive my parents, I have to forgive myself, and I want to create a new path for myself, a new name for myself. Um, I graduated top of my class. I graduated class president. I was in many organizations,
All
and I
right.
and I graduated with honors and got scholarships, and that wasn't in my future,
Mhm.
according to my records. See,
Right, right.
my mine said from this to the prison, and thank God I skipped the. Thank God I skipped the prison. You hear me? Like
It's a good testimony, bro.
I'm telling you,
well,
thank God I skipped the prison.
well, you said so. This is awesome. Uh, you said you had to forgive your parents. Did you ever see your father after you came to this new light and a new way of thinking, a new way of life? Did you ever contact your father in that?
Yeah. Funny thing, man.
How did that go?
Life has a way of crossing paths, man, and intersecting. So he got sick,
Mm.
and um, he ended up coming to Atlanta, Georgia, and this was before I got here, and I'm in college and in school, getting my degree at Alabama A&M University, and I now, I told you when I met my brother, me and my brother stayed in contact.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
we've been staying in contact, and he'll keep me updated with, sometimes he's the one that kind of keeps everybody together. He's like, Mom, Dad, he gives me the update on everybody because he has a more closer knit. So me, and I'll talk a little bit more later about like what the attachment is and that failed to kind of keep and communicate with everybody. So he kind of keeps me up aboard on that. And so so me and him keep in contact. He tells me that Dad is in Atlanta with my auntie, who I live with now in Atlanta. My auntie, who I had never ever experienced or seen or anything. And so he's in Atlanta, Georgia. He's staying here. Post college, after I graduated college, I mean, like my senior year, I did not have plans on coming to Atlanta, Georgia. I was thinking about going back to either Chicago, to Tennessee, or Birmingham for a job opportunity. It wasn't until I had a conversation with my brother, and he was trying to give me, he said, look, man, you can come down here to Georgia. I'm here. Auntie is here. And I was like, okay, cool. I'll think about it. That's going to be my last option. My last option.
Yeah.
Come graduation time in December. A lot of my jobs that wasn't falling through, they were still pending. And I'm like, man, I need to get up out of Huntsville immediately, right? There's pressure to kind of just go and go because my lease was up on my apartment. And then my brother called me. I was like, man, he said, come stay with me and my girlfriend, now his wife. And I said, no, I don't feel comfortable doing that. And he was like, well, ask Auntie. I'm like, I don't know, Auntie don't even know me like that. I called my auntie. I said, Auntie, I know this is probably strange. I said, do you mind if I stay there? If I got a job in Atlanta, do you mind if I stay there for a little while? And she was excited. She was like, yeah, nephew. She's like, you're the only one of my nephews I ain't been able to raise and to see. And I was like, I bet. When I get there, my dad is staying there.
Oh, wow.
So my dad is staying there. I never lived with my dad before. Never spent more than a day with him. So it was interesting enough. And this is where the breakthrough came in. The first maybe 3 months that we were there, I was, trying to have conversations with him about him. And he was just so like, just nonchalant, like, man, you still in school, man? What you doing, man? When you gonna get a career? The talk. Yeah, when you gonna get a career, man? You gonna do something, man? You always going to school. Every time I turn around, did you graduate yet? I'm like, yeah, I graduated. I said, you was at the graduation. He, oh yeah, hey, I forgot.
Yeah.
And then something hit me. We was talking one night. I said, yeah, Daddy. I'm like, why you never say love? He like, why I'm gonna say I love you for? You already know I love you. I said, Dad, something from when you say it out your mouth. And he was like, I ain't got time for all that, man. You can go on somewhere else with that. So real dismissive. So I took it personal. So every time I try, he'll shoot it down. I took it personal, man. I was like, man. And I said to myself, I ain't gonna say nothing else to this guy, man. I'm gonna come and go, and I'm just gonna leave it at that. Now I realized that my father didn't give, he didn't care either way. He had already been fixed and stuck in his mind. And so I prayed and I asked God about, I said, God, how should I treat this situation? I want to be in the same house with my father and not have an opportunity to experience what he's like. See, you better be careful what you pray for, because God will call you to a higher account when you pray certain things. And I prayed this prayer, and here's what the Lord said to me. I thought the Lord was going to tell me, you know what? I'm about to change your father's heart. I'm about to do this. This is what he says. He says, for the next 30 days, you go in the room and you tell him you love him and you give him a hug every day. And don't worry about what his response is going to be. Now, I was like, what? My pride kicked in and I was like, nah, man, because I was already upset and mad. And so I did it, though. For the next 30 days, I went in that room. I was unattached to the outcome. I showed up in the room powerfully. I said, hey, Pop, I just want to let you know I love you. And I said, and I need a kiss. And he's like, man, what you gay, man? What you don't want some kissing, man, right? And so I started to see it to be hilarious. So I started getting a kick out of it. So I said, look at him, like, frizzle up like that's like, it's cool. So I hug him and give him a kiss. He'll fight me and then I'll walk off. And so every day I did this, right? Something happened, man. Like something will restore. Something was restored. Like the joy, like this pressure that he had to do and perform and be. And I was like, it was what it was robbing me of is my experience with him, just the way he is. And then allowing the love that I give to him back, right, just permeate his heart and let him respond however he needs to respond. And so I did this for 30 days straight, and I didn't have to stop doing it because at that point it became a habit. And what I found out is our conversations got deeper, right? Transparencies got better. And we started having conversations about things that I had yearned to have conversations about. He'll even find himself giving me advice about some things. He'll even say, I love you, you know what I'm saying? Have a good day, So those things started to happen gradually and slowly. And it was the best feeling of my life. I was like, yo, and we'll go. I'd be like, because at first I'm like, no, I don't want Pops to go nowhere with me. I take him to church. He embarrassed me. I was like, I ain't taking him to church. And then the Lord had to get over me, like, take him to church with you so people can see your father.
Yeah.
And I took him to church with me. Oh my God, he was acting a fool, but I had to, but it taught me like how to love him in all his ways. And I had
Gotcha.
a different appreciation for him, man.
That's awesome. That's a wonderful story, man. About that, how your father was estranged from your life for such a long time, and then at the right moment, you guys came back into uh, a relationship, and if you guys are listening, if you can see the smile on Aaron's face, man, is just from ear to ear. When he's talking about his dad, man, and that's amazing. I think that's really vital and essential to uh, life. Your father. Uh,
Yeah.
so so moving now to the future, your relationship with your dad is restored. Good relationship with him. How did Rise 5 come about, or when did that come about? And can you tell us
Rise
about
five.
tell us
Mhm.
about this upcoming event you have as well?
Absolutely. Rise 5 and has come up. Oh, that was the first part of your question, right?
Right, right, right.
Okay. So Rise 5 came up. I went on a trip with a couple of friends. It was about 20 something of us, and we decided that in this COVID nature that we were all we were all believers. So we said, let's all link up. Let's not forsake the fellowship of the brethren. And let's kind of take a trip and get away from all the hoorah. And so we embarked on this journey to rent out an Airbnb, nice mansion. And we were all there, and we had put together an itinerary of just to have fun and worship and giving God all the glory. And so one of the days we were at the lake. It was a lake with a kind of like a beach, or I mean like a little thing on it where we can stand on. And so we was all out there, and at this time it was all the fellas, and there was about six of us out there. And we were talking about the things in the world and what was going on, and we were talking about our positions as men, like where do men stand in this? We're like, what do we have a hand in this at? And so I said, hey, listen, y'all. I said, how about for the next 30 days? It was June at the time. I said, how about for the next 30 days, y'all? We commit ourselves to meeting and gathering and bringing our power together, bringing our ideas together, our resources, and let's see what we can come up with. And so the first meeting we get there, we were all excited, dapping up, laughing, making jokes, being free in our conversation without correction. You know how it is when we get together.
Mm.
And and then after all of that energy settled into the space, we looked around, and I kind of gave just a pitch of understanding to the space. And I was just saying, look, brothers, today has brought us together because we want to do something amazing, but we just want to find out who we all are. Because I'm like, we dap up, we see each other, but we don't even know who each other are. And I'm like, I want to first give us an opportunity to reintroduce ourselves to one another. So
Mm.
we spent that first meeting reintroducing ourselves, getting acclimated with each other, and building relationship. The second meeting is where the creative space took in place. And I said, I want us to get on a project together, because I believe that when we are able to work together, I said, so we need a reason to work together. So like, let's come up with an idea. Let's come up with something meaningful that will give us a reason to work together with each other and see our true strengths and true weakness, and give us an opportunity to lean on each other in this time and be vulnerable.
Hmm.
So we started coming around. I told him I had a vision about that God had a vision. I told him I had a vision that God gave me about 5,000 men. I said, God gave me 5,000. Came from a story when Jesus was feeding the 5,000.
Mhm.
And God has showed me that I want to raise 5,000 men. I want to raise 5,000. And so I went back to the meeting. The next time I said, yo, I don't know how we're gonna do this, but let's do something that calls for 5,000 black men. Well, first I said 500 because I was scared to say 5,000. And so the Spirit of the Lord was like, nah, stop chickening it out, man. And I said, well, and I told him, I'm like, well, it's really 5,000, but I think like 500. And I'm like, nah, you know what? 5,000 it is. And so we started generating names and we started talking. And he was like, what do we want from men? And all we kept saying is like, we want men to be uplifted. We wanted men to just rise. And so one of my boys was like, yeah, man. And he had this thing called 5,000. He was like 5,000 plus. And I'm like, you know how you look for that ring? And we were like, we get it, but it might be too ambiguous, right? And so it was like, well, I'm like, we want men to rise, man. And he was like, how about rise 5? I said, yeah. I said, there's a little ring to it. I said, rise 5 it is.
Yeah.
And so, and then, the rise 5, I said, 5,000 is just the goal. That's just the start. I said, we understand that 5,000 will multiply and increase, but we have to set a goal and we want 5,000 black men to rise all over the place, all over the world, whether it be Atlanta, Georgia, Chicago, or wherever. But I'm on a aggressive mission now to ignite the passion, the purpose, the man inside of you that has been sleeping for way too long.
Mhm.
You call. I can't tell how many men I meet, man. And I said it in my what's name, that live under their God-given potential. And notice I said God-given potential. So many men who try to suffocate the things God has given them or pervert the things that God has given them for their own benefit, for their own livelihood. And it always puts you back at ground zero.
Yeah.
And so my thing is to ignite a spiritual awakening in man's heart. I don't even want to say spiritual because that's so ambiguous these days because you like, oh, spirit. I want a God-given awakening. The Lord our God, Jesus the Christ. That's what I'm talking about. You got to be specific these days. There's too many gods out here. So I told myself, I told God, so I'm living for you. I'm being bold for you on every platform I stand on. So I'm talking about that God, the God of the universe. And I want to awaken that and let the men know that God is calling you back home again.
Oh, thanks for sharing. Just to wind down, I gotta ask this question. It's probably my closer question.
Mm-hmm.
You gotta share with me. I've been doing some research about fathers, and there seems to be some sort of link between fatherlessness and atheism. And you know, God-fearing, talking about, spiritual things, but you also come from a place where you didn't have a father. How did your relationship with God, if you always had one, or if you didn't have one, or if you developed one later, do you personally see that there is a link between like fatherlessness and not believing in God, or having a father as God, and something like that? So basically my question is, when you were in the foster care system and you didn't have a male role model in your life, did you view God in a certain way, or were you angry at God, or did you always have that sort of faith there in the background?
I think at the time I didn't know what a God was. That wasn't preached in my environments. That wasn't talked about until I got to my main foster home, my final one. But up until that 8 years old, I didn't have a reference. Some people can say I'm mad at God. Even when you say you're mad at God, you know him. I couldn't even say I'm mad at God because I ain't know him. I ain't know, that ain't who I'm looking at the people around me and saying, I'm mad at you, you, and you. So I didn't have a recollection of this God thing, but I knew there was a spirit inside of me. I knew that. I knew it was a spirit inside of me that would not let me give up.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't always attribute it to myself, But I mean, all I had was myself to look around at, right? So,
Right, right.
so I was like, I'm strong, and I'm gonna keep on. And it was the spirit inside of me that God had imparted inside of me that allowed me to endure a lot of those things. Now, when I got to my foster home, like I was telling you about, mom working that job, and then the dad staying at home and doing this. The other part of that story is that she'll go to church every Sunday,
Hmm.
and every Sunday that she'll go to church, the other three siblings will play possum, and she'll ask like, "Y'all need to get up." So she was like, "I ain't gonna be late for church. Who's ready?" And here I am like this. Cause I ain't know what no church was. I'm just like, I wanted to get out the house anyway. I find a reason to get out the house. Like, and so I was like, I'm ready. And it reminds me of like, who's ready? Like how God is with us. Like God makes the appeal to all of us. The
Yeah, yeah,
invitation was to all of us in the house, but I was the only one that answered.
yeah.
And I showed up, man. I will never remember. I showed up and I was sitting in church and I watch people. I'm a watch, I'm an observer. I take things in. I'm watching people and I'm just sitting in the church like people shouting, dancing. And I'm a dancer. So I like good music. I was like, I don't know what I'm dancing. So I said, so I'm just like, this is a good time. This is a good time. And so it wasn't until she started taking me, she noticed that I wouldn't mind going with because she didn't have nobody to go with. So it was almost like it was a relationship being built. She's like, I ain't got nobody to go with. He's willing to go. I'll take him. So on our rides, she guess what? She'll be talking to me, and I'll just be like this because I didn't know how to respond to nothing she was saying. So I'll just be like, and what I didn't know. Here's the thing. Here's the kicker, Rob. What I didn't know, man, is like those were seeds
Hmm.
that she was depositing inside of me. Didn't know, Keith, that those were seeds that she was putting down on the inside of me. All I know is one day I was sitting at a choir rehearsal, and they were singing a song, and she had told me because I had been coming for a while, and I had been sitting out in the audience. But she said the music minister of music, Carvel, was like, "Come, tell him to come on up here. He always dancing. Tell him to come on up here. He can be in." So they knew. I'm like, I want to be a tenor because I like them. I'm like, I want to be a tenor.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
So I
yeah.
sat in the tenor section. It was like, just when we start singing, don't say nothing. I'm like, all right. And I remember, man, we were just sitting there. The choir rehearsal would be so anointed, man. Like it wouldn't just be like rehearsing; it'll be like actually the worship of the song. The spirit of God would be in there. And I remember like stuff coming over me. And I used to ask my mom, I'm like, I feel something. And she remembers she telling me, she's like, whatever you feel, boy, don't quench the spirit. Now I didn't know what quench was. I'm like, don't be. What do you mean quench? She said, don't hold back. If something comes over you, just let it go. I was like, whatever you say. So at that time, I was like, whatever. And I remember the song like it was never before. We was at choir rehearsal this day, and we were singing that Jehovah Jireh, Jehovah Jireh, my provider. And that thing was looping and looping. And some way, somehow, that thing had got in my spirit, man. And that day, I felt the presence of God come over me. That was the first time I ever cried in worship or in my little dance experience. And I didn't know at that time I was praising God. I ain't had the language for it. But the first time I let some tears drop. And then the pastor, even in that church, which was good for me, he was an old school pastor. He was about 85 when I was that young. So you imagine how long he used to cry, right? He used to weep sometimes through his sermon. And when something overwhelmed him, and I used to be sitting in the audience like, it must really hurt. Like the kid, you like it must hurt, whatever he's going through.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
remember those morning devotions when you get there early, and the deacons are up front opening up, sir. They up front exhorting and praying on their knees, and they were welling out to the Lord. And so I was like, wow, this is what men do. And so
Hmm.
for the first time, my worship and the spirit of God that was in me was not like one where it's like it was stiff or stale, it was expressive. So as a man, like, when I was out in the world, I'm like, no, you can't be seen crying. But I was like, I had made my connection. I said, well, I guess church is the only place I can cry.
Hmm.
And I started crying in church. I started releasing in church. So when I tell people about like I didn't grow up in a church, I didn't grow up churched out, I didn't grow up in all those things. I grew up. So once my introduction was made, and guys in the street were even talking about God. I just didn't know what they were talking about. But once my introduction was made for myself, every time I came to the house of God, every time I prayed, it was personal. So I never got caught up in a lot of church stuff because it was personal when I showed up to the house of God. It was personal when I was listening to the word. And I'm like, this is personal because my life depends on it. And so I still to this day, it's the same thing. I don't care where I'm at, what I'm doing. It's personal because I'm like, you don't know what God did for me. You can't imagine. And so when I'm talking about like getting to the Father, I feel like the woman with the issue of blood. I feel like the man that was sitting down at the pool for 38 years and finally his healing came. I feel like the friends who opened up the roof and let my man's down to get his heal. I'm like, whatever I gotta do is personal. Like, period.
Hey,
And
yo,
that's why,
that's
you know
no,
what I mean?
that's
So that's
awesome, man.
for real, personal.
That's you heard it here, folks. It's a personal thing. Um, if you've listened to this podcast enough, you'll see a pattern here. But I'm not gonna say it right now. I just want you to keep listening, and maybe you'll catch the pattern. But Aaron, thanks for joining. Um, I thought I had another question for you about your father and things like that. Oh, this is really the last one.
Okay,
Uh,
no doubt.
when you used to have those deep conversations with him, did he ever explain to you like his life of the drugs, how he got hooked on it? Did he ever talk about his relationship with his father?
Yeah, and I think that's what gave me the grace to forgive him and to love him differently when he expressed to me his relationship to his father, and and during that time period, those drugs were like what we would consider to be cigarettes and weed at this time. That's how familiar those drugs were to that generation. And but he talked about his relationship, how he had this hate towards his father, and how he felt towards how he treated his mother and how he did her wrong and how he was unaffectionate and and because I asked him and he was like no, he was like that guy ain't never he was never around. And it made sense. And then for the first time I had a conversation with him, it made sense. Now I had stopped beating him up in my mind for not being around. I was like, dang, he don't even know how to do this. And he don't even know what that feels like. I said everything that he's doing now is out of survival. Like he's still in survival mode. He's still trying to cope with the loss of his father, even when he was alive. The loss of his father and in the absence of his father, even when he was or never coming around, being alive and never coming around. Because I asked him this question, Keith. I said, "Did you go to Granddad's funeral?" He said, "What? Why would I go to his funeral?" So you see how deep like that 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 feeling he had towards him. And
Right.
even as a 67-year-old man, he had been carrying it around. 68-year-old man, he'd been carrying this around with him for years on top of years, and has been shaping his experience with his sons and with his daughters. And I had declared and decreed over my life that that thing stopped with me, and it will not permeate into my children. I will get this completed and finished and done, and I will settle this. This is settled. And my children will have a father who they have access to mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. So that put me in deep prayer, man. And so when I figured that out about my dad, it made me pray for him differently as well.
Oh man, I'm remarkable, man. Aaron, thank you. If you have anything you want to share with the people, this might be a special broadcast. I might put this one up really quick.
Yes,
But
sir.
do you have anything you want to share? Anything you want to plug? Any of your information?
Yeah, man. I want to anybody's out there follow our page at Rise 5 2020. That's RIZE 5 like the number 2020. And if you have any comments or if you want to know anything more, you can go to our website at rise5.com, rise5.com. And our email address is rise52020 at gmail.com for anything like that. And the first thing that we want to get kicking off for our Rise 5 is our mentorship for men, young men. And if anybody want to support and donate, you can email one of those channels or you can contact me at the email address just given. So we want to restore, we want to heal, and we want to revive our men in this season because we need strong men. And also we got the Black Man March coming up August 15th, this Saturday in Atlanta, Georgia at Anderson Park. Um, And so it's going to be fun. I've been excited about that, man, excited and nervous. And I've just been spending time with the Father. And it's not just a Black Man March, it's a stand for God. And I believe that where you stand in this world, especially now, it's going to be totally important to what happens to you. And so it's just not about social justices. It's just not about that. We don't understand that everything that happens down here is connected to God. And so we've been standing for everything. We've been standing for politics. We've been standing for Black Lives Matter. We've been standing for this. But the Lord just put it on my heart. Where are my people who are standing for me? And so I said, God, I ain't going to leave you out. Black Man March, standing for God. And so that's what it's about. And so I got it because God wants to see who's going to be bold and unapologetic for him in this season. No more hiding under rocks. No more, be ducking and dodging, hiding behind church walls. Ain't no church walls. Hiding behind the church walls. I'm the church. I'm going to bring the church to the wild. And so I'm excited, man. And I thank you for having me, Keith, man. Thank you for inviting me. Shout out to Tasha for connecting us, man.
Yeah, for sure.
This has been an amazing thing, man.
Awesome. Well, you heard it here. Aaron Walker, ladies and gentlemen, you guys have a good night. Peace.
Peace.